This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:06 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast, and you're on Ask a Rabbi.
And good morning to everyone. A happy Friday morning. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb from Congregation Eitz Chayim in Port St. Lucie, your spiritual Jewish home on the Treasure Coast, including the frog in my throat.
That's all right. I cut your mic off.
That's the wrong holiday. You know, frogs are in a month when we get to Passover. But this week we've got the Festival of Purim, the Feast of Esther. We have the Fast of Esther first, and then the Feast of Esther. And that's all coming up really soon. And we have our dress-up Shabbat this Friday night, a special service in a way of celebrating Purim, especially for those who want to start the festivities a little bit early. There is no festival quite like Purim. I will tell you, you dress up, and you had asked me what do kids dress up as. I think when I was little, it was popular to dress up as Esther or Haman, the bad guy in the story, or King Ahasuerus if you had, kingly pretensions. You could be any of the folks in the story. Vashti, who's the queen that Ahasuerus bans.
You wear the long dresses and stuff like that?
Yeah, you do whatever you want. But today, I'm just as likely to see Elsa or a mermaid or, some superhero or Spider-Man or whatever. And, it doesn't matter. The idea is to have some fun. It's a festival where we're instructed to be joyous. It's kind of a turnabout upside down festival. And that's not surprising. It's and there's so I'm going to get really, really blunt. I mentioned last week that it is the most X-rated of scriptural texts, and we have a cookie, and I love the cookie is called a hamantaschen.
Wait a minute, Stuart was talking about
he was
cookies.
Talking about giving cookies to car dealers.
Yeah.
But everybody tends to eat the hamantaschen, and it's a triangular cookie. Now, you can kind of draw this in your mind's eye. It's a triangular cookie with a filling. The traditional ones were done with poppy seeds and or plum butter, so they're dark. But you take, the way that you make this cookie is you take a circle and you fold over and make a triangle out of it by folding. So you've got these 3 partial circle tips.
With a cream filling or something.
Well, whatever kind of filling you put inside it. And it's kind of a fun cookie. And people say, it's innocuous. Not quite. It is meant to represent what it looks like. Use your imagination.
Yeah.
And
oh, boy.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that's kind of interesting, right, it's a montaschen. Mon is the poppy seed, and so it's a pocket for that. In Hebrew, it's called Haman's ear, and in English, we call it Haman's hat. Yeah. So if a cookie's got that many different names, it's because people are trying to figure out a nice, polite way to talk about it.
So what kind of poppies are you talking about in the?
Well, then it was just poppy seed pie filling,
Okay, all right, yep. We don't want to get DEA involved in all this stuff.
There you go. Yeah. Well, I was checking out the other day at a store, and there's all the CBD products.
Oh yeah. Oh boy, it's hot.
That's out there now.
Yep.
So lots of things that are available. And it is a good time. And the instruction actually is to get so high that you can't tell the difference between a blessing and a curse.
Oh, God.
Okay, so it is.
Oh.
Yeah. And I actually have a theory that I think some of the anti-Semitism in Europe comes from those years where Purim gets delayed a month, but Easter isn't. And why do I say that? Because people are running around. They very often hang Haman in effigy. So they're running around with little gallows with a little figure hanging from it. And they're snockered drunk. And Christians are in the middle of Holy Week.
Oh, no.
Okay, and I can just see where,
no.
And I can see where this doesn't translate well.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right, so I think that might be some of the root, and it would be interesting to back the calendar up and see when some of the hostilities started, if it wasn't the year of that or the year right after it.
Wow.
When that happens. It doesn't happen very often. That takes a pretty strong calendar misalignment, but it does happen. It happened once since I've been in Port St. Lucie, but it doesn't happen all that often. Yeah, and I don't know what the statistics are on that either, but it's not often. Most of the time, Purim is a full month ahead, and probably is connected. Imagine this, to something like Carnival or Mardi Gras.
Wow.
Yeah. Right. Which is
man.
a wild time before
Yeah.
you go into Lent. And, I think that early Christians, retained parts of the calendar without necessarily understanding where they came from or tweaking them or whatever. And so we see similarities that kind of almost align, but not quite.
So how much wine was there at the Last Supper? Oh.
Well, if it had been, which it isn't, a Seder, then there would have been at least 4 cups. Although it's kind of interesting, we have actually a 5th cup. And that's kind of a fun story because most Jews don't know why we have an Elijah cup. There's nothing about Elijah mentioned in Talmud, but big parts of the Seder are mentioned. And so
I thought Elijah was a big part of that.
Becomes a big part of it because Elijah is supposed to come before any messianic age and announce it, because that's Elijah's job. And
He was the Howard Stern before Howard Stern.
There you go. And but the way that we have the cup for Elijah, that's really the 4th cup. And there are 4 cups specified in the Seder. There's a lot of 4s, a lot of 4 symbology going on because there's 4 spiritual realms. And we can talk some more about that as well. But there's 4 cups, and at one time it was superstitious and bad luck to have 4 cups, an even number of cups. And so they added a 5th cup, because you can't take away, you can always add. So they added a 5th cup, and then they forgot why they added the 5th cup when the superstition faded away. But they were left with this 5th cup, so they converted it into Elijah's cup. So that's a little bit of trivia. Some Haggadahs will mention that, not many. It's not a well-known detail out of Passover, the Seder. And I did mention, and I'll mention this just so people can follow, why can't the Last Supper have been a Seder? A couple of reasons. One, the Seder as it exists today was not developed and designed until after the temple is destroyed, and the temple is not destroyed until 6770 in that period, right? So Jesus is long gone, right? Because most estimates are that his crucifixion was around 30. It's kind of hard to pin down because we don't have really great Roman records by name from that period, and besides which Jesus' name, so common, it would be almost impossible to notice him in the crowd. It's Joshua is his Hebrew name. And people try to mangle that a little bit so you don't pick it up. But it's Joshua, and Joshua is very common, especially since we had a judge by that name. And it also means he will save. So popular name for many reasons. And Joseph also very popular because Joseph was another big hero. So to have Joshua the son of Joseph, not surprising. Or Joshua the son of Miriam if we don't know who the father is. And, whichever way you want to go. Again, another very popular name. So it's basically impossible. He doesn't have an unusual name like some of us do. Makes it a little, I'm easy to find on Facebook because if you Google my name,
there's only one.
There's only one of me. And, what can I say? Yeah, it's not as common a name, especially not when paired with my married name. So, yeah.
That's cool. Yeah.
So it makes it a little bit unique. Doesn't faze me one way or the other than to notice the difference between having a common name and an uncommon name. So that's one part, is the Seder as we know it today, which is really a blending of the Roman Symposium with the Zoroastrian celebration of Nowruz.
There you go, Zoroaster.
Zoroaster. He plays his followers play a role. They have a spring festival, and they do a spring plate. And if you Google Haftzin or Hafshin, then you will see the plate, and it looks amazingly like a Seder plate. Surprise, surprise. So the rabbis of 1st and 2nd century Judea, when the temple's destroyed, look around and say, now what are we going to do? We can't do Passover the way that it's instructed in Scripture, which is to take the lamb, the bitter herb, and the matzah and eat them together. Because we can't do the Paschal lamb. We can't do the lambing without the temple. Okay. Why not? Because
I was just going to ask why.
There's a very ritual way to slaughter the lambs.
Okay.
Right, and you've got to collect the blood and not use the blood on all of that. So that doesn't really exist until the rabbis get around to blending, and that's what becomes the Seder as we eat it, as we do it today. And I have a feeling I'm going to be answering more of this question with Bob, but let's find out. Bob on line 1, thank you for calling.
Good morning, Rabbi. What I'm wondering is every time the gospel is read, it's when the Passion is read, it's usually they were getting ready for the feast.
Yeah.
What feast exactly would that have been?
Well, if they just say the feast, that is actually Sukkot, which makes a lot of sense. When you just say the festival Jewishly, you are talking about Sukkot, the fall festival with palm branches. Imagine that. Palm branches, waving palm branches and saying things like Hoshana.
Okay,
that's the festival. So if they're just saying the festival, that's what they're referencing. And that makes a lot of sense.
With palm branches.
With palm branches. People are walking around with palm branches.
That does make sense because when they read the Passion on Palm Sunday, and that's when palm is distributed.
Yeah, well, again, so we're taking the traditions that are Jewish, and we're kind of like mingling them with Greco-Roman culture. And that's how a lot of the holidays become defined in early Christianity. They take bits and pieces. They take bits and pieces from Jewish tradition, which some of the followers would have known. They take stuff from Zoroastrian, which Zoroastrian followers would have known. There's this big mingling going on in the Greco-Roman world. Alexander starts it when he conquers the known world. One of the things that he's known for is mixing up the traditions, putting Zeus temples here and taking this festival from there. And so we see a tremendous blending of stuff because Alexander's goal, Alexander believed that Greek culture at the time was the ultimate that anybody could be. So anything that he liked, he blended in. And we see that documented, that, he picked this habit up in Macedonia, he picked that one up in Egypt. And so there's this tremendous mixing up and down the Silk Road. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's just part of life. We do it today. I've talked other times about teaching Chinese students, and several of them celebrate Christmas, but it has nothing to do with Jesus. It has everything to do with Christmas trees, Santa Claus, giving gifts, and having a good time. And what some of them do for Christmas is they go to KFC, Kentucky, which they call Kentucky.
Oh my God!
Yeah, Kentucky, and they have fried chicken. They might have a roasted chicken or a roasted turkey. Yeah. They're not going to have the really traditional Christmas dinner kind of meal. They're much more likely to do a fowl, either fried chicken or something like that.
It's foul if it's KFC.
Well, what they're doing, and it makes some sense, right? You've got Chinese people who spend time in America who go back, and they take bits and pieces, and what sticks? Having a good time, having family gifts, and the decorations. And the decorations make a lot of sense to them. They pick up on the red in Christmas because red is a very important color in their culture. In fact, Chinese New Year is celebrated very often by wearing red. So, so you've got this mixing going on. But yeah, if text says the festival, it's talking about Sukkot. Because as Talmud says, if you haven't been in Jerusalem in Sukkot, you have never been to a party.
Okay, is that when? Because also when at the time that Jesus was crucified, they'd say, Pontius Pilate as well, we can give you Jesus or Barabbas.
Yeah. Now that's an interesting name, Barabbas. Barabbas is a Latinization of son of the father. Bar is son, like in bar mitzvah. Abbas is father. Barabbas, the son of the father. It's an interesting name. Yeah. So what's going on is there's a whole lot of stuff that's going on. And Jesus is in that mix. Okay, Jesus is in that mix. Hundreds of thousands of people are being crucified throughout the Roman Empire. It's not unusual. He's found guilty of a crime called Mageus. That that fits with the inri that's over the top of his cross. If they're going to put something up, they usually put the crime up. So what's inri? Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Why is that a crime? Because they've got Caesar.
Who's the king?
Who's the king. And to claim that you're the king is to usurp the government of Rome. And that's treason, capital crime. And who's he next to? They're usually, today we say two thieves, but thieves is not the right word. It's robber. Think more of Robin Hood. Okay, they're highwaymen. They're harassing the supply route of the Romans going up and down to Egypt. Because they have to go across that land bridge, and they're being ambushed, and that's whom he's crucified with. And of course, that would also have been treason, a capital crime. Okay, so there's a lot of markers that show that that's what the Romans are thinking of. And whether or not that little thing about we'll give you somebody, that might be an appeasement. Sukkot, that festival in the fall, is when most of the rebellions start. The Romans are very, very nervous at the ingathering of Jews because a lot of people come to Jerusalem. There's 3 holidays where everybody is instructed to appear in Jerusalem. So anybody who's within travel distance will come. At Sukkot, they're staying in booths outside. The weather's such that it's okay to stay out in things that look somewhat like a ramada. So the inns are all swollen. Everything is going on. There's a ton of people going on. There is drinking like you wouldn't believe going on during Sukkot, and the mixture of nationalism and alcohol, and food and abundance just is the perfect firestorm for a rebellion.
But you say fall.
Yeah, that's in fall. Yeah, not spring.
But okay, so how did this wind up in the spring?
Why did it end up in the spring? My theory, and it's supported by some other scholars as well, is that there's a desire to move it off of Sukkot so that it doesn't get lumped into all these other things that are going on. Although some of the text stays because people know these pieces. And there's a desire by John to want to equate an innocent lamb that's slaughtered. Because the lambs, here's the issue behind the lambs. Here's what a Pesach, the Paschal lamb, really is. There is a set of festivals going on before Judaism, one of which is a lambing festival. If you are a shepherd and you have a bunch of lambs, Okay, a whole bunch of little baby lambs. Now, if God is good to you and your flock increases and you have 100 little girl sheep, little baby lambs, how many little boy lambs do you have? If you have 100 girls, statistically, it's about 50-50.
I would say the same.
Yeah, about the same. How many boy sheep do you need to service the 100 little girls?
My guess would be one for each.
One for each? Oh, no. They're not monogamous.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I mean, think of a cow, of a herder. They don't have 100 bulls for 100 cows. How many bulls does the average cow farmer?
Oh, man.
Right? They have a handful because why? Bulls fight. What do little rams do? What do they have those little horns for? Because they go into rut. Right? They start bucking each other, and they'll tear each other limb from limb, and they'll tear anybody else apart who gets between them. So the average shepherd is going to keep somewhere between, and I'm guessing here, 2 to 5, maybe, because that's how many you can keep apart, so they don't kill each other or kill
50?
you. For the 100 little
For
girls.
100.
Because you only needs to be with her for a few minutes, and then he can go on to the next one. All right, so you're going to keep the best ones. Now, what are you going to do with the other 90 little boys? Because
who knows?
You know, come April, right? Exactly. Come April, the girls are going to start going into heat. They're going to go into estrus, and that's when the boys go crazy. So you're right; they're going to slaughter them. They're going to have a lamb festival, the lambing. Okay, and it means to cull the herd, to get rid of the ones you're not going to use in your breeding program. And what are you going to do? You're going to roast them and eat them. It's really just a very, very basic farmers, right? You're not going to feed a bunch of unnecessary little boys. And if you look at most of the offerings that are done in the temple, they're the males. They're yearling males. Why? Because they're fully grown, so the flesh on them is developed to the full size. And you get rid of them before they become problems, and you haven't fed them for a long time. Wow. So it makes all kinds of sense. And are they guilty? They're not guilty of anything yet. They're still too young, right? Their misfortune is not being the best-looking sheep in the herd. So that's not exactly a big sin. But it's not going to save you from not being slaughtered and eaten. And so, John wants to equate Jesus with those lambs and say that, he's an innocent who just happens to be in the right place at the wrong time. And so he gets caught up in it. And he tries to he says the slaughtering of the lambs is occurring while the sun is setting, while Jesus is on the cross, because he wants him to die with the sheep. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that you can't have eaten that sheep the night before, which would have been the instruction for Passover. It's really hard to eat the sheep before it's slaughtered. Hard enough to do it quickly that night, but let alone, to do it the night before.
Yeah.
It gets a little, fuzzy in your mouth. And I'm making a little bit light of it. And that's not, obviously something happens with Jesus and his followers. That is the Last Supper. It's just not a Seder. And for those two reasons. One, the Seder as we know it today didn't exist. So, making it look like that's what's going on, not going to work. And John's scheduling also makes it not work. So if you're going to follow John, and John's the last of the Gospels, and it happens after the destruction of the temple. So he really wouldn't have known what it was like in the temple when that was ongoing, particularly if he isn't living in Jerusalem, and he's not because Jerusalem has been wiped off the map.
Well, actually, all four of them have accounts of, Jesus being crucified at festival time, whatever.
That would be Sukkot. If it just says festival time, right? Because Christian scriptures is very, very specific. when it's talking about Passover. It says that Passover of the Jews was at hand. That's true in the stories of the loaves and the fish. It's very specifically mentioned there because the writer wants to make sure that you know that people have food in their pockets. Okay. So why is that important? Well, you see in Passover, in about a month, most of the restaurants in Jerusalem are going to close. They'll close for a week because it is easier to close and lock the door and pretend that it doesn't exist than it is to make it suitable for the festival of Passover.
Okay.
Because that is such a lot of my father's family comes, they either go on cruises or they go to resorts over and lock their homes and walk out because it's easier to do that than it is to actually prepare for the festival. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of that last night because I was baking Hamantaschen.
Well, it's fascinating what Bob was talking about. You start thinking of the amalgamation, if you will, of all these various religions with the palms and the festivals and stuff like that.
Well, the only palm festival that's in Jewish tradition is in the fall when it is natural to trim the trees, right?
Yeah.
To dress the palm trees,
which we still do now.
We still do today, and they also use the palm branches as the roofs for the booths, for the ramadas, and people still do that today. You throw anything that will provide some shade and some protection, and that's how a booth is made for the festival of booths, which is Sukkot. So you shift just a couple of little things, and it starts to make more sense. Christianity goes through some drastic, major changes in the late 300s, a la Constantine, and the emperor who's two after him, whose name is escaping me at the moment. The one right after him actually tries to reassert tolerance of many different religions, but he doesn't live long. Rome has this habit. Constantine's kind of unusual. He's Caesar for like 12 years. 12 years after he conquers and kills his brother-in-law, who's his biggest enemy. If you really read Roman history, it's
brutal.
Constantine, while he's having the Council of Nicaea, has his brother-in-law and his nephew killed so that there's no heir from his sister. Right, Constantina, rather. I love the names. The names in that period were just horrible. It's hard to tell the players. So, Rome is a very, very brutal. They kill people at the drop of a hat. You look sideways at somebody who's got power and you're dead. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. Hundreds of thousands of people crucified. It's a way of keeping the population docile, and you keep the strongest, most virile males dead. It works well for having a servant population.
With a crucifixion, you have a public display.
Of course, and that's why you put the crime, where people can see it.
Wow.
So you label some of these, and if you look at early Christian art, you don't see the small letter T for a cross. You often see a capital T or some. We don't really know what a cross looked like back then. We don't really know what they were hung on. Kind of an interesting thing. And if you look at some of the Christian crosses, some of them have a tilted arm, some of them have. There's a variety of symbols. Yeah. It's not a uniform symbol, not as much then as it is now. It's become much more uniform.
Okay.
Thank you, jewelers and mass manufacturers. Right. So, if you look at early Italian art, you'll see something very different. So, so thank you, Bob.
Okay.
I hope that answered some of the questions, and it doesn't detract from it. The Passover being what it is today is what it is, and people enjoy it, and it's a very endearing ritual, but it's not what they did in the days of the temple. Okay, thank you, Bob, and now we have John on line 1. Thank you for calling, John.
Hi, good morning. I've never heard your program before. I just moved back to Port St. Lucie after a few years, and I find your facts fascinating. Forgive me for this ignorant question. I guess I could look it up on the internet, but I always forget to. With the Jewish faith, when did the sacrifices stop?
Okay, John asks, when did sacrifices stop? Now, there's two answers to that. The sacrifices in the temple stopped, of course, when the temple was destroyed, because you can't do it if you don't have a place to do it. Does it linger a little while longer? Yeah, it does on high places, but is for the most part over. On the other hand, we're still sacrificing today. And the difference is we wrap it up in plastic and put it in Publix. Right? Because we still slaughter animals before they've lived their whole life in order to eat them. So those animals are sacrificed. They're just not sacrificed with the blessings and the sanctity that would have happened in the temple. Sacrifices in the temple were eaten. If you read the scripture carefully, you'll find out what's burned, the dung, the entrails, the fat. They were very keen on not eating fat, by the way, especially in and around the tail, one of the fattest parts, still is today. All the things that you don't eat are what's burned. And why do you burn them? Because barbecue smells a whole lot better than rotting flesh.
And
right.
Was it the Levites, if I'm not mistaken, were allowed to eat?
No, everybody eats.
Okay.
The priests eat the truma, and they get the right shoulder because it's bigger. Most animals are right dominant. And so they get the right shoulder of any animal that they slaughter.
There's no left-handed lambs?
I'm sure there were, but they were in the minority. Just as left-handers.
Just like we are here.
Yeah, just like left-handers are today in humans. I have a theory that the scribes in ancient Israel were probably left-handed, because why would Hebrew go from right to left?
Ooh.
No right-hander would do that.
That's right.
Okay, but a left-hander sure would.
A left-hander would.
Yeah. So that you don't
It would probably be easier writing Hebrew and left-handed, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I think the early scribes tended to be in families because you learned your trade from your parents. So so that also may speak to having a left-handed group. And but in early writing, it goes both directions and it goes up and down. The Chinese go down. And they start from the right and go down and move to the left. Kind of interesting. A lot of these things are done so that the scribe doesn't get their handful of ink.
True.
It's a very, they didn't have Bic pens. They didn't have Parker pens. They didn't have ballpoints.
I had my mother's father, my grandfather, was born in Budapest, and we think he was Jewish, but he wasn't a practicing Jew, but he married a Catholic girl, and when my mother was in school, the nuns she was left-handed, and they actually used to slap her on the hand with a ruler to make her right-handed.
Yeah, well, there was a time when people thought that left-handed was, deviant and the devil's child. Now, part of that's a practical thing, okay? And by the way, my father also came from Budapest. And you
said it correctly.
Well, that's what happens when you're raised by one.
Is that a Budapestian or
something like that? Yeah. Well, you're either from Buda or you're from Pest. It's actually two cities on either side of it. Never mind. I don't know that much. Yeah,
it's true. My grandfather was from Buda, and my grandmother was from Pest.
Yeah, there you go.
Wait a minute, come on, guys.
No, it's true. You just have to look it up. But in any event, so part of the thing with the left hand though comes from before toilet paper and before running water, And
Oh, this is getting interesting.
okay, well, yeah, right. So you saved your right hand for things like food and handshaking, and you saved your left hand for something else.
Ooh.
So if you were left-handed, you would reach for food with your left hand, and there was a health issue associated with that. And so
you could apply that today with this virus.
yeah.
Open the door with your left hand.
Yeah. Well, and greet people. There's a group now doing it with bumping elbows.
Yeah.
Because we spend too much time with our hands on our faces. They were taught not to do that too. But that's one of the reasons for the anti-left hand, is what it was used for.
Wow.
Yeah. At a time when it wasn't easy to come up with sanitation,
Yeah.
keeping your left hand for specific functions was very important. And it may also explain why the scribes had to wash their hands before writing.
Wow.
We
Yeah.
take all this for granted today.
Yeah, it's probably connected to all that. Right? And there's an interesting little piece. There's a discussion in Talmud that goes, when do you invite somebody into the community? And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is alive in that interim period between the 1st and 2nd centuries, and he says when they wash their hands. So clearly cleanliness and washing hands, very important. They may not have understood totally germ protocols, but they certainly observed them. They learned that people who washed their hands tended to be healthier. And that's where some of the left-handed stuff comes from. It's also a very practical reason of why you, particularly in Muslim countries, you don't show the bottoms of your feet or your shoes to people. Think about what would have been in the streets before we had non-animal transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than, show stuff on your shoe to somebody, you can see where, you tended to keep that underneath you, or you set in a certain way so as to not get that on you.
Well, it's interesting, too. Part of the Catholic Mass is hand washing.
Yeah.
By the priest.
And it is
Interesting.
And it is
Wow.
part of Islamic practice as well. And it's part of, ready for this, Zoroastrian practice. So, there's these two cleanliness pieces, right? There's the ablutions, the washing, which is part of most religious gatherings, and removal of shoes on places that are holy, because you don't want to take donkey stuff into the building. Mm-hmm. It starts out as a very practical thing. It doesn't sound that practical today when we have cleaner streets. We have no idea how much cleaner the streets are without animals. Go to Williamsburg. I've said this other times, because they actually have horses walking in the old town to create that ambiance, and as a result they have people who try to clean it up, but every once in a while you've got a few pieces here and there, and that's bad enough. But can you imagine if all the rich folks rode on animal back? You're going to have a lot more, and carriages and things like that, particularly for those who needed the assist. So you're going to have a lot more animal product on the floor. And you don't have, anywhere near the clean facilities for humans either. Humans are going in places that are not necessarily as sanitary. So a lot of the things that we have today come from those times, and they make sense in it. They make all kinds of sense. So that's where the stigma around left-handedness comes from. It has more to do with bathroom qualities of a number of years ago. I mean, toilet paper is I'd have to Google it, but I don't know when toilet paper was invented. That might actually be worth asking Siri.
Still not in Russia.
Well, and it wasn't.
Let me tell you, Russia's pretty.
I remember when I was traveling, when I was coming back from Israel, we went through France or to Israel. I forget which it was. We went to or from Israel. And did I just lose you?
I think
yeah. So anyway, thank you for calling, both John and Bob. But when I was coming back from Israel, we stopped in Orly, the airport in France, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I went there, and they did not have what I considered reasonable toilet paper. They had some waxy stuff that might have been okay for scratching the back end of you, but it sure wasn't okay for everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in those days we used to tell people, take a roll of toilet paper with you.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I've heard
If you're
people-
American,
yeah.
take a roll of toilet paper.
Yeah.
Because we advanced toilet paper to the soft absorbent stuff that we use now much ahead of the rest of the world. And so, and we tend to think of technology that we have as if the whole world has it, but they don't. I mean, one of the things that I tend to notice coming from European parents, I naturally use my silverware differently. Now, if I think about it and I've got a group that I think is going to be very conscious of it, I will stop and force myself somehow to do it American. My husband, who was born in the U.S., I was born in the U.S. as well, but his parents were born in the U.S., he eats differently. He cuts his food and puts down his knife and switches hands and eats with his fork. Europeans don't do that. You hold the food with the fork, you cut it with a knife, and you just bring it on up. You bring it up to you.
I've never even seen that.
You don't pay attention to it.
Wow. Okay.
But that's how Europeans eat. You cut the meat, because that way it stays warm longer. Other than, because most Americans will cut multiple pieces. They'll cut 3 or 4 pieces rather than play musical instruments.
Okay, so you talk about all the health issues, then...
What about the left hand and eating and using your left
Well,
hand?
yeah, right. But...
It's why you wash your hands for dinner.
Exactly, yeah. The eating of pork, though, for the
also has
Jews
some health.
would be a health
Yeah.
issue,
It-
right?
and
No
it ma-
refrigeration.
Well, there's no refrigeration, and that's why food has to be eaten within 3 days.
Yeah.
Which is why, if you leave something out overnight, it's not bad. It unless it's got cream or eggs in it, something that's going to spoil quickly. Eggs only spoil if they're not fresh and they have been washed. If you don't wash them, they stay longer outside. Yeah, talk to a farmer.
Wow. Okay.
Lots of little tidbits.
This is amazing.
I've
Okay.
always gotten all these little pieces, but so no animal that doesn't chew its cud and have split hooves is kosher. So that keeps you in the vegetarian animals. No bottom feeders, if you will. Right, pigs will eat anything that's put in front of them. Right, slop the pigs, give them the garbage. Well, if you're going to eat garbage, then what you eat, you're eating the garbage that your food ate.
That's probably why you don't eat shellfish.
Yeah, same reasons.
Same reason.
Same reason, 'cause
Bottom
it gets
feeders.
it gets the scuzz off the bottom of
Wow.
the ocean. And if you look at it, there's a lot of diseases associated with shellfish that are not associated with fish.
Yeah.
Right, your hepatitises tend to come from shrimp or lobster or something that's gone bad. And we don't think of that today, but I know that when you were young, or certainly when your parents were young, you were told not to eat shellfish in any month that didn't have an R. Right?
I've never heard that.
Never. Well, because the original...
That's intriguing, though.
Well, the fishing boats didn't have the refrigeration, the instant freeze that they do today.
Right.
And so in what are the months without an R? May, June, July, August. Summer months when the shellfish are going to spoil.
Wow.
Coming in off the ship, most likely to spoil until they. And nowadays we don't think of that because the fish is cleaned and frozen on the ship. It comes off the ship frozen, and that's done for health reasons to keep the product more readily available. And so things are changing. We've got better health standards, but you still hear about people getting food poisoning much more often from pork products that aren't well prepared or from shellfish that isn't well prepared. Yeah. So do I think that all of the kosher rules are about health? No, but I think they do tend to make you healthier. It's a whole lot easier to worship God when you're feeling good than when you're worshiping the porcelain throne.
Had a friend at NBC News who lost his wife.
There I go. rubbing my nose.
Poison shellfish.
Yeah.
Poisoning it right in a restaurant. It was instantaneous.
Yeah. And it happens, and it still happens, right? And so, and it's not so much that people couldn't eat those things as that you couldn't serve them at a public gathering. That's a piece that's often missed, including by Jews. When something is kosher or not kosher, that means for a public time of eating, and so there's also cleanliness rules for the people. You can't have touched a carcass within a day. There's all kinds of stuff before. So, and we look at them now. They're wonderful protocols for not spreading disease and not having mass poisonings. If you don't use shellfish and you don't use pork, you limit yourself to these specific foods at public gatherings or communal gatherings or large family gatherings, then you're much more likely to be eating healthy food at a time when people may not be paying as much attention to what they're eating.
Okay, were there vegetarians back in the day?
They were much more vegetarian than we are today.
Oh,
Americans are...
I was joking, but really?
Yeah, well, because... you're not going to slaughter an animal unless the whole animal is going to be eaten.
Okay. Right,
because although, let me tell you a really gruesome thing that happened on the cattle drives when they were moving cattle out west, they would slowly eat a cow. Okay, so they would eat a leg and then, put a tourniquet on the animal so it could still live. Because they didn't have refrigeration.
Oh, man. Oh.
And they couldn't eat the whole animal at one sitting. So this poor animal...
Oh.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. Wow.
Well, it's not well publicized.
Yeah, I would imagine why.
And so, they basically slowly ate the animal until there was only enough left to... Oh. Yeah, it sounds horrible.
Yeah,
and that's one of the reasons why Judaism says you slaughter the animal and butcher it and eat it. And you burn what you don't eat. So you're not going to be eating anywhere near as much meat, except when you have a big crowd to eat an animal.
It sounds so much like, when you talk about the Jewish religion, if you will, that a lot of it was kind of common sense health habits, too.
Well, it's a very organic, practical, empirical set of practices. People learned over the centuries, with a little bit of insight, a little bit of divine inspiration, what works and what doesn't. And and it's filled with. There's the wonderful story of the birds flying overhead that collapse, and the people who craved meat, who couldn't stand just living on manna or whatever it is that they collected in the desert, and those people who ate the birds that fell out of the sky died.
Ooh.
Yeah, and now we know that if a bird falls out of the sky in your backyard, don't roast it. Right? We know some of these things now, but back then they were learning them. Right? The ancients were learning them. And so, we've inherited a lot of these traditions from our ancestors, things that are just known. And they do have a health side to them. They're not purely about health, but they tend to be healthier. And so that is one of the reasons why Jews were believed to be the source of the Black Plague twofold. One, Jews were busy in the trade industries. They tended to, because of the language skills and other things, tended to be part of the trade, and because of the health practices, tended not to get as sick. Because of the cleanliness, didn't have the rats that carried the fleas that carried the plague. And so if you're not getting sick, then you must be causing it.
Oh, God.
Right. So we see a lot of very faulty logic. So this has gone a little bit afield. I was going to talk mostly about the festival of Purim and Esther. One of my great I chuckle every time somebody asks me this, because every once in a while they'll say, well, wasn't Esther the epitome of what a bride should be? And it's like, not even close. So not.
Well, you've blown that theory out of the water.
Yeah, Esther is not the epitome of a bride. And I'm not even sure that Ruth certainly comes closer, and I'm not sure she's there either.
So would Esther make it on the Bachelorette show?
Esther could make it on a number of TV shows. She must have clearly been a very beautiful woman, incredibly sensual. She knows how to pleasure the king, which she learned from the men who wear dresses. Ooh. Yeah.
Oh.
Read the text, folks. Read the text.
Oh.
Right? They would have known from both sides what to do.
Oh, brother.
And so it's important. It's a great festival. Have some fun. We keep it very PG for the kids, and that's important. But it really is meant to be an adult festival.
Okay, so what time does it start?
Well, tonight we have a special service of Friday nights. Our usual time, 7:30. Do come in costume if you'd like. We also are meeting at Whispering Pines. Look for the folks in costume. That'll be at 12:30 on Sunday. Whispering Pines. We're going to do a Purim celebration. We'll have some games for the kids. We'll have lots of fun activities.
That's cool.
And of course, since it's America, we'll have hot dogs and hamburgers. No pork.
Uh-huh.
But anybody is welcome.
Kosher hot dogs.
There you go. Well, Hebrew National, they answer to a higher power.
Yeah. Boy, you still remember the commercial.
I do.
Oh, yeah. I used to love those commercials.
Those commercials would, the writers of those would be very happy. I'm really good with jingles. I'm so good with jingles that I can still do Tov Yoterim Coca-Cola Hu Tov. Which, for those who remember, is actually the Hebrew radio commercial of "Things go better with Coca-Cola, things go better with Coke."
Wow!
And when I heard that in Hebrew, I almost fell off my chair. Coke is amazing. Coke can make any language look like Coca-Cola. It's just it blows my mind how their font people. Their art people can make any language have that font. It's a very particular font, and I got
I'll bet your Chinese kids don't know.
No,
do
they've got it.
Yeah,
they've got Coke. They know Coke very well. I have a shirt actually from Curacao that says "Things go better in Curacao."
Oh yeah, sure.
And Curaçao's written in that font.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
I love that T-shirt. It's from when we went on a cruise and went to Curacao. So all of that, this is the time of rejoicing, the time of festival. Think Carnival, folks. Think of having a good time. This is not to endorse drunken behavior in any frame or mind, but rather, be like me. I'll offer that. Have a natural high. Have fun. Forget your ego and just have a good time.
Just can't believe we had drunken behavior.
Oh, I can't imagine people would ever get drunk.
No.
People still unfortunately do. And that I think is a dark side of the celebration. But people look for excuses to get too drunk. You still have to know that it's either maybe you can't tell the difference between a blessing or a curse, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just can't. You don't need alcohol to get there.
Ooh.
Yeah. So please join us on a Friday night at 7:30 or Shabbat morning as services start at 10:30. We're at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102, front building next to the elevators on University Boulevard. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim. This has been Ask a Rabbi, and again, thank you, John and Bob, for calling in. Please feel free to sponsor me. Call the station or call the congregation. I am looking for people to help sponsor and keep me on the air. Have a great week. Have a great Purim.
What time is Sunday again at Whispering?
Sundays at 12:30 at Whispering Pines.
Cool. All right. Have a good week.
Take care.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster to the world.